brought to you in part by Howard Products. Since 1969, Howard Products has made a wide range of polishes and wood finish restorers. Their hit products, such as Restore Finish and Feed and Wax, have been used in the vintage audio industry for decades, enabling vintage audio enthusiasts to keep their equipment looking as good as they sound. If you want to find out more about Howard Products or to take a look at their product range to see what you can use to bring your equipment back to life, check out www.howardproducts.com. Glad you're back for the third episode of the eCoustics Vintage Audio series. This is episode 3. I'm your moderator. I got it correct this episode. Only took 3 times. Mitch Henderson from Black Circle Radio. And our hosts for this series, we have Eric Pye, Audio Love YYC, and we have Jeremy Sikora at Budget Audio Filer. This episode, we are going to be speaking about speakers. Yes. I'm really excited about this conversation. And I promise to both of our hosts that I'm going to do my best to keep my mouth shut to some extent. I'm safe to say on behalf of the three of us that we are pretty passionate about our playback when it comes to speakers. There's so much to discuss, so much fun to be had in very different ways and for different applications. So I'm excited to kick this one off. Jeremy, we're going to begin with you. Eric, you started last episode. So I think, Jeremy, from a beginning standpoint, I know you got the ohms. That are stunning.
All the ohms. All ohms, including Curtis.
You don't have 4, you don't have 8, you don't have 16 ohm. You're running all the ohms. What about that speaker is just lights out for you?
So the speaker that you're talking about is a 1973 Ohm F. It's a single driver. It's a titanium aluminum and paper driver. It fires downward, but at the same time it radiates 360 degrees. There is no crossover. It is a direct connect single driver. You can adjust the sound by where you place it. So you place it away from the other speaker and away from the wall, and you will get a different sound. It's about 4 feet tall, maybe 3.5, 4 feet tall. It doesn't look like a speaker at all. And it's as mid-century as it comes, speaker wise. So it certainly has a look to it. It's got a sound signature, but I would also say it's very much on the fringe of speakers. So when we talk about speakers today, we'll talk about 2 ways, 3 ways, woofers, mids, tweeters, what all of that means, all of the specs in between. And then there are the fringe ones. There's flat panel ones. There's ones that are 6 feet tall that are one's giant ribbon tweeter and 24 other drivers. So there are fringe ones like that, which are very, very interesting. But for the most part, we'll talk about the traditional speaker and both the traditional speaker of probably the 60s and the 70s, and then into the 80s.
Eric, and you just made a recent change to the shag room, the shag rug room. What change was that? Because I really just want to hear you talk about it.
Okay, well, I'll show you. Just move my laptop there. So that there is the Bowers & Wilkins DM2000. They came out in the early 80s. And years ago, not so many years ago, but a few years ago, I had a pair of Bowers & Wilkins bookshelf speakers, the DM1200s, that were maybe 30 centimeters tall by 20 centimeters wide, 2-way speaker, tweeter, and a woofer. These ones are also a 2-way, but if you take a look at them, it looks like there's 3 drivers there. The bottom one is a passive driver, so basically It doesn't have any electronics to it. It's just basically mirroring what the woofer is doing. They're in a sealed box, and so it's kind of like a ported speaker, but the port is covered by the passive. I bought them a week ago. They cost me the equivalent of $500 American. And they, as I said, they're 40 years old, and they're so good that I'm considering selling all of my other speakers.
I can't believe they're that old. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, by the way, the speakers that he showed, they've got the top tweeter area, and then they got these just stunning yellow main mid driver. Is it correct?
No, that's the woofer.
Oh, it's the woofer right there.
Yeah.
Oh, and the bottom one's the passive.
The bottom one is the passive, yeah. And the woofer, the yellow, is kind of like a B&W kind of classical look. It's made of Kevlar.
Got it. That's cool.
Yeah. So
I'm excited for those speakers.
they're amazing. I mean, and we were talking before the broadcast about subwoofers and those kinds of things, and should you have subwoofers with a vintage system. For me personally, I'm not a big subwoofer guy. The music I listen to doesn't require subwoofers because it doesn't go that deep. But these things, they'll go down to below 30 hertz, which is pretty low, and it's only a 7-inch driver. Wow. And there's some roll off to it, but it goes deep, and I've been just blown away by the sound, the dynamics.
Jeremy, so going into the speaker realm, and I brought this question up to you when we had our conversation earlier about receivers and amplifiers. When you're getting messages or being contacted on the Budget Audiofiler page, what are some of the common questions, sure, or maybe common concerns maybe that people are bringing up to you regarding, is it repair, is it what do I get, is it what's that conversation like on your end?
The most common question is, I have a blank receiver, what's a good set of speakers? My next reply to them is, what is your budget, what is your cost range? And then the most important thing is really pairing that receiver with the speakers. If the receiver is 100 watt, then it will have a little bit more flexibility on what speakers you can pair it with. Also, on the other end, speakers have something called sensitivity. And that's a magic number between 85 and I think I've seen it as high as 106 on some of the older and basically what that number is the efficiency of the speaker, meaning how much do you need to make it run. So Mitch actually has a very, very high efficiency set of speakers that I'm looking at right now. K-horns.
Yeah. 68, 69 clip horns.
So you only need about literally 10 watts to make those.
I run them on 1.
Yeah. So you don't need wattage. So
1-2 watt.
When we talk about pairing, that's an excellent example. But also these things are, Mitch, those are what, 3 feet and probably about 80 pounds a piece.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
So
they have to be shoved into a corner or they don't sound right.
Yes. So you have to have the real estate and a furniture mover to help you have speakers like that. Right. Versus a bookshelf speaker, which oddly enough may need 100 to 150 watts to run a bookshelf speaker, where you have something that's absolutely massive, but you can run it off of anything. So the most common question is what speaker pairs well with this, and I ask them what kind of sound. So to kind of go into what Eric said, speakers can have 2 ways, 3 ways. The only difference there is the presence of a mid, and how the bass is handled. Are they sealed? Do they have a passive? or are they ported? And ported is going to be a little bit more punchy. But the passives it really expands the bass, making that driver sound bigger than it is. And then the sealed is a little bit more traditional. And all of them have different efficiencies. So pairing the wattage with the efficiency is probably the main thing. And then it comes into, okay, how much speaker can I get for the $200 I have, or for the 500? So listening to Eric's latest purchase, that's a great recommendation. And there's also ones in the $100 range, and there's also ones in the 200. And then with speakers, as the three of us saw earlier in the year, it's literally sky's the limit, because these things turned into works of art, and you can get into the six figures with speakers.
What are you using? What are your opinion? Not even opinions, wrong term, but your entry level. A lot of times, my head goes to a bookshelf, but I know that is more of a modern take on a speaker, because or modern thought process surrounding speakers, because a lot of the vintage stuff I would not consider bookshelf really at all. And so taking space into account that you have in your room alongside budget is equally as important. What are your kind of thoughts on getting into vintage in that regard, Eric?
Well, yeah, you're right. I think the bookshelves are probably a more modern thing. Your typical speaker in the 60s and 70s would have been probably kind of a couple of feet tall by a foot wide. And you would typically put those on, you wouldn't be able to put them on a bookshelf so much, but they would be what we call stand mount speakers. So,
Right.
you can see these. My KLHs, which you'll see on my Instagram, have stands, and several of Jeremy's speakers have them as well. That tends to be where most people are going to start. I mean, again, when we talked about receivers, it's don't start with tower speakers that are going to take up half of your room kind of thing before you even know whether this is something that you really want to be doing.
Right.
And you don't have to go too expensive with that kind of speaker. Jeremy was talking before about the Advents, the Advent larges, and that kind of a speaker at around $100 or so is a great start into vintage audio. It's efficient enough to work with most amplification. It sounds fantastic, and you don't have to spend a lot of money. And then, as you get into it, you can start thinking about, well, I want to improve this, or I want to improve that, or I want better mids. One of the things that I ask people when they ask me about what speakers to get is, what kind of music do you listen to? Because that's also an important thing. If you listen to a lot of hip hop, you're going to want something, maybe like a JBL or something that has a big 12 or 15 inch woofer to give you that bass. If you listen to jazz and classical, then maybe you can have speakers like I have, because it doesn't have a lot of bass. What about you, Jeremy? What do you recommend?
So I like the Advent. Those are really great places to start. They were engineered very, very well, and they're at a decent enough price point. I'd also recommend some small wooden stands for them and get them off the ground. Ultimately, you want the tweeters at listening ear level. Most people don't listen to it standing up, so if it's kind of couch or eye level. But those are great ones, the Dynaco A25s. And the interesting thing about vintage is they did have vintage bookshelves, but they were not small, and they did not fit on a bookshelf. It just meant they weren't floor standing models. The modern bookshelves are actually like the size of a shoebox, and it's just a different view on what actually fits on a bookshelf. And then also just kind of get a good understanding of your room and the speaker placement, because speaker placement's very, very important. So if you're buying something ported and it ports out the rear of the speaker, you can't put it, actually you can put it right up against the wall, but it's not going to reach its full potential. If it's front porting, that's a little bit different. You get a little bit more flexibility. If it's sealed, then you just space them based on the room size, the space away from each other, and where you sit in the room.
I had a question regarding similar to that for both of you that I've been thinking about today. When it comes to a speaker, I feel that I'm committed personally to my speakers more than I am any other component, where I'll have a speaker in the setup for longer than I will an amp or a pre or whatever piece that may be. Do you guys think that's the correct methodology of thinking, where if someone is looking into, I'm looking into maybe a new set of speakers, but I just seem to be rolling different pieces of equipment all the time to find a sound that I'm not finding. I personally tend to go back to the speaker first. Okay, but are you kind of understanding my sentiment? And it's kind of like the anchor of my system, I guess, or the speakers first, and getting to know them. Do you guys agree or have feelings about that?
So there's no wrong answer there. I actually asked that in a poll. What do you base your rack around? Surprisingly, it was receiver, speaker, turntable, and then others. So there are people that will have either an emotional attachment to either the speaker or the receiver, and then they will turn other dials instead of that. I know that having the ohm Fs in the house, those are now not a variable. I will tweak other things in order to get the sound. And just by watching Eric's feed, speakers come and go.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different curiosities. But I see the Sansui stay or one of the versions of the Sansui.
Yeah, on my side, I would say so. I'm not really tied to either, but for me, the synergy is really important. And so, I mean, I look back at the history of the speakers that I've had and the amplifiers that I have. I spoke about the bookshelf B&Ws that I had. I sold those because they just weren't sounding right to me. I also sold a pair of Klipsch quartets that weren't sounding right to me. I regret selling the B&Ws, not so much the quartets, because they have kind of a bad reputation, and there's a reason why they were only made for a limited time, and that the Klipsch isn't making version 4 of them now. But I really, really wish I had heard the quartets with a tube amp. I didn't have a tube amp when I had the quartets. Klipsch and tubes are a marriage made in heaven. And so I really wish that I had heard them, because I think I would have enjoyed the quartets more than I did. The B&Ws, speaking of efficiency, they're 83 decibels efficiency, which is like really low. And so what that means is that they need some real power behind them to make them sing. I sold them to a friend who put 200 watts into them, and they sounded absolutely incredible. The B&Ws that I just bought are also in the low 80s for efficiency, but I'm running them with the Sansui 9500, which is very powerful. I've also run them with the Macintosh, which is 100 watts a channel.
Okay.
And they sound fantastic because they have enough power to drive them properly. I have a pair of ESS that are 96 efficiency, and those with my Dynaco 35 are a joy. because they're efficient enough. They can take the tube power, which isn't overly powerful. It's one of the more powerful tube amps that you'll find commonly, but they sound great. The Dynaco doesn't sound great with my Kefs, which are in the low 80s as well. Those speakers need more power. And so what I'm trying to say is you need to have your amplification power and the efficiency of your speaker, and then you need to blend in the kind of music that you listen to get that kind of magic synergy that is going to make everything sound good. And I'm willing to change amps. I'm willing to change speakers depending on what issue I'm trying to fix.
And so, Jeremy, with that mindset that Eric just gave, that mind frame goes across all budgets, correct? Like, it doesn't matter, the speaker doesn't matter, the amp, but that synergy does have to exist.
Yes. Yeah. So
Okay.
I can easily say in my journey, the most expensive speaker I have ever purchased, the first amp I plugged it into sounded horrible. I had a pit in my stomach on buying those speakers, and then just moving it to a more powerful amp, it completely different sound. So that synergy is absolutely key. And it's at any price point. So if you want to spend more money on one component, and kind of balance it out, it's easily done.
Yeah, one of the things I would say for, like, if you want to buy new pairs of speakers, take your amplifier with you to test the speakers with. If you have a set of speakers that you are able to carry and you're thinking about buying an amp, well, you don't actually have to carry the speakers, but ask the person that you want to buy from if they can bring the amplifier to your home and actually hook them up to your speakers to listen to. Not so important if you're not spending a lot of money, but when the amount of money that you're putting into it does start to go up, there's a reason why stereo stores will let you take stuff home and try it out at home, is because you're looking for that synergy. And if it's not there, then you probably don't want to make a purchase.
What was what are the Kefs that you have, Eric? Because I've owned a set of Kefs that were, man, they must have been like 90, maybe like 88 to 90, right in there. I had those for a while. I just couldn't find excuse me, I just couldn't find a replacement driver, and I got sick of looking, and got rid of them. But I really enjoyed a lot of times the Kefs that I have heard. I've heard of quite a few different Kef models from different vintages as well. And some of those are pretty size friendly. Man, I don't know. What's your experience? I like that brand. We haven't talked about them really.
Yeah, my Kefs they're Kalindas from 1976.
Oh, okay.
They're a little bit smaller than the B&Ws that I just picked up. They're actually hidden behind the B&Ws right now. They have I think it's an 8-inch Beckstream woofer with a little tweeter, and they're also a passive reflex setup. They are, low 80s on the efficiency range. And those were speakers that I considered selling as well. But I had an emotional attachment to them. And so I held on to them. And when I got my NAD power amp, which puts out 150 watts a channel, and I hooked them up, those speakers were transformed. And cool. Now I will not get rid of them. Like, they are keepers. But yeah, they're pretty small. They're probably 80 centimeters high, maybe 75 centimeters high, not very wide. They go quite deep. They were some of the first speakers that were computer designed back in the mid 70s. And so, yeah, for their size, given enough amplification, when I put those on, I'm just like, wow, these are incredible. And they're wonderful for the kind of music that I listen to. But yeah, I mean, Kefs are well known for being power hungry.
Yeah, you own some freighters over there, man.
Some freighters?
Yeah, like shipping boats. When it comes to just power, they're just like moving along. I mean, take a lot and they push hard. That's
Yeah.
cool. I didn't realize that those B&Ws or the Kefs the efficiency was like that. But putting some power behind it, it's a completely different sound. Like it's a completely different experience. It's like a fullback is what it kind of reminds me of, with the low efficiency, high wattage, and it's a really cool ride.
Yeah, and the great thing about that is that you put that power in, you can play them loud, but the sound doesn't break up like it does with a low power amplifier, which you can also play loud, but it starts to just. Jeremy talked about clipping. When you've got enough power behind a speaker, the tests for those B&Ws, they ran 400 watts into them, and they didn't distort. So that kind of power. We had a friend over last week, and we were listening to music down here, and my wife doesn't typically like to listen to music loud, but we had the music quite loud. She was like, this sounds pretty good. We maybe need to do some of these listening concerts a little bit more.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Jeremy, when you're when you're talking about vintage systems and bookshelves and all these different, and especially budget, right? With your platform, one thing, it was in an eCoustics episode, man, it was a while ago. But I remember you talking about that. I think it was the Yamaha receiver, the real stunning one with the rectangle knobs. And I think that you said that you had a set of vintage bows with that.
Yeah.
And those, everyone's got their thoughts about them, but when it matches, it matches. And that again would be a very budget friendly option that you can find, like used bow stuff all over the place, if your match is right with the amp.
Yeah, so I brought over 4 different sets of speakers to kind of see what's going to fit the room. The room wasn't very big, and just kind of see what the different options. And I didn't expect the bows to be the ones that stayed, quite frankly. And those are very, very different speakers. These were one of the variations of, I believe, the 501s.
Okay.
But all the different models in those are different, all the different, and also depending on how old they are and how these were a very well kept set. So they just sounded well. So that got to stay.
I find that the speaker journey to me is, it's the hardest, I think. Because there's just so much that goes into speaker design that maybe I research them more or something, where an amp is kind of an amp where you can turn it on. They all kind of have the same functionality as a baseline level. But speakers are tough for me. They're like, now we're talking sensitivity and we're talking different types of amps and then different designs. And I mean, Jeremy, yours are the Ohm Fs are essentially omni, and then you're talking passive, baffles, the woofer, and to bring the conversation back into an entry level point with all of that stuff. How, if you couldn't match something with your system, if you found a good deal online, or if you found something at a yard sale, or however it may be, what advice would you give each of you to someone who's having a tough time, or that's overwhelmed, but they want to pull the trigger?
So just because it's a good deal doesn't mean you should buy it. One of the tricky parts about speakers is just the size. And I know a lot of people that have a lot of different amps and a lot of different receivers, and you could swap those out pretty easily. But when it comes to speakers and you not having a storage container for them, there are good speakers. There are speakers that aren't paired well, and then there's bad speakers, and then there's damaged speakers.
Yeah, totally.
So
Good
those
point.
are all the different kinds of speakers. So just because you have something, I bought a nice set of vintage Fisher ones. I heard good things about them. These things must have sat for 40 years, and they were just rock solid. I mean, rock solid as in they didn't move. They were fully functioning, but they had just been not used for so long that they were no longer a viable speaker. And that wasn't even a speaker that I resold. I just gave them away. I'm like, whoever wants to come and take these, go ahead and have them. So that would fall under like the bad and or damaged. And then there's other speakers that you've heard great recommendations on, and that's where you just have to get that pairing right, and also be very aware of your room size, because if you put in massive speakers in a tiny room, and depending on the sensitivity, and I'm not talking Mitch, the ones that run off of 1 watt, because that's just a different sound to it. But if you put in these big something with a 12 or a 15 inch in this tiny room, you're just going to flood the room out instantaneously.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. And with the room thing, I agree. It's important, like, because those speakers, the clipped horns, are very important for my personal workflow. And just because of how sensitive they are, and my room's only 144 square feet, and there's 2 young kids sleeping. So when I got to use the speakers, I got to have it low. But yeah, there's definitely reasoning behind the room, the choice of speaker given the room and the circumstance in which you're living in. What about you, Eric?
What was the question again? Sorry.
In regards to someone being overwhelmed with the purchase,
where do you start?
Advice that you would give in that way.
Well, I guess, I mean, if you don't have anything, like you don't have a receiver, you don't have speakers, you don't have anything, I would say don't buy without hearing, but go into a local shop that sells vintage equipment and ask them to play you some stuff. And, if it sounds good in the store, it's probably going to sound okay in your home. Talk with the people there about, this is the size of my room that I'm going to be putting them in. Do you think these will work well there? And take them home and try them. Some stores will let you take them home and try them. But the other thing I would say is, like, if you have a budget and the budget is not too big, you have to jump in at some point and just get something. Because if you're completely new to this, you don't even know what you're listening for, start with a system and it'll probably sound okay, if it sounded okay in the store. And then over time, as your ears adjust to the system and as you kind of learn about, this is, maybe it's lacking bass or it's lacking on the highs or whatever the case may be, then start to think about, okay, so what's a different speaker that I can get that will take care of that problem? But if you're completely new to it and you don't know what you're looking for, you just have to kind of like jump in at some point.
Yeah, I like that advice quite a bit, because there's different pieces of equipment that I have like that. Almost it's anxiety, right, about purchasing in regards to what it is. Like, am I going to just talk myself out of ever kind of doing it? Which is, yeah, that's not I don't feel like that's the right thing. That's not the right choice.
Well, it's like upgrading your phone, right? It's like, okay, I've got this phone. I've had it for 4 years. It's starting to run really, really slow. But if I wait 11 months, the next phone will come out. So should I get this year's phone or should I wait 11 months for next year's phone? At some point, you just have to jump in and say, you know what, it's better than the one that I have. I'm going to jump in. I'm going to buy it, and 3 years from now or whatever, I'll buy the next phone and it'll be better.
Yeah, that makes sense. I had one final question for whichever one of you wants to take it, or both of you. But it was regards specifically more towards the vintage stuff on the used market. So talking about, whether it's a Facebook marketplace or if it's Craigslist or, Audio Karma or whatever, not Head 5, but you know what I'm saying. On these fused speakers have been an oddity for me when you're seeing a fuse like in the back of where the plug is, for your we're just I'm comfortable with that now, but for a long time when I would see those, I'd get kind of skittish, and I think it's because I wasn't used to seeing glass fuses like not inside of a fuse holder. Any thoughts there for people looking to purchase?
I like them. I like them for the sheer reason you're going to hurt the fuse before you're going to hurt the speakers. So it kind of gives you a little bit of little extra insurance if you make a wrong choice or a wrong move.
Right.
I would agree. I mean, the some of the speakers that I've had not fuses, but they've had like a relay that will trip if they get overpowered, and then basically, they you can trip them back. But I think anything that's going to protect your speaker from being damaged, there's nothing wrong with having that there. I think
And it's a good look, too.
particularly if you're dealing with a speaker where you have an amplifier that is more powerful than the speaker is rated for, it's nice to have that protection.
Thank you for that. And it's a good tell too, if you're buying a set of speakers like on the used market and it does have a fuse that you can see and it's blown, then it gives you a pretty good impression on how maybe the speakers were run.
Yeah.
Possibly.
Is there anything else in regards to speakers that you guys would want to touch on before we wrap for this one?
I thought Jeremy might touch on refoaming speakers.
I thought so too.
Yes. So if you see speakers and the surrounds of those speakers are rotted out, and you want to learn something new, refoaming speakers is not overly difficult. Obviously, I would try on a set. For some reason, the thrift stores always have infinities.
Totally.
And the surrounds are all rotted out. And for $30 to $40 or 20 even, you can get a set of small infinity bookshelves. And then practice on them. Just follow the instruction. There's all kinds of videos on how to do it, and you can get a speaker for incredibly cheap. So the Advents that my son uses, those were found with the surrounds rotted out. I didn't even haggle on the price. I handed her over the cash and said, "These are great." Took them home. My son and I refoamed them, and they're incredible sounding speakers. So when it comes to speaker buying, don't be afraid of that. You may have to replace a tweeter or a mid every once in a while. You can, for the most part, repair. And then certain brands you can get the parts easier. You can also get a blown speaker and use that as parts, but avoid anything with water damage. Anything that's obviously physically abused as well. But you can also refinish. So if you have either a full wooden speaker or a wooden veneer speaker, that can usually be brought back to a pretty good finish relatively easily.
Is this where you mentioned Howard's?
Yes,
I love Howard. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, the videos that you've done using that stuff, they look insane.
Yeah, it was taught to me by somebody who did mid-century furniture, and I'm like, well, they can use it on that expensive stuff. It can surely be used on a $40 set of
speaker, right?
Eppies. Yeah.
Where do you go for the refoam kits?
There's this place online. It's called Simply Speaker, and I've been using their refoam kits religiously. Not to say that the other ones are bad. It's just I got lucky on the first, and then I watched their videos. I did exactly what they said, and lo and behold, it worked. So then I did it again and again, and then I just got better at it. So with practice, yes, you can do it, and that's something that I truly believe that with a little bit of practice, anyone can do.
And I think there's something to be said for trust in vintage audio. Like when you find a supplier who you trust, or you find a tech who you trust, or whatever, those things are gold.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. So all of us have kind of either brands that we like. Obviously, any local techs, those tend to be mainstays.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to this episode. Speaking about speakers, I don't know if that's going to be the title or not. That was funny. But thank you to Jeremy Sikora at Budget Audio Filer, Eric Pye at Audio Love YYC for hosting this episode. I've been your moderator, Mitch Anderson from Black Circle Radio. Thank you to ecoustics.com for the platform, and looking forward to the next conversation, which we have much more to cover in this vintage realm. Please remember to hit subscribe, and we'll check you on the next one. Thanks.
Bye for now.
Bye.